War has a way of stealing things, territory, lives, futures, and sometimes weapons so good that even the conqueror refuses to give them back. If you were standing on a muddy parade ground in Central Europe in the late 1930s, you'd hear a mechanical rhythm unlike any other. Confident crack of a Czech light machine gun that looked unassuming but spoke with absolute authority. When Germany marched into Czechoslovakia, they expected to seize factories and ammunition. They did not expect to find a weapon so reliable, so precise, and so perfectly engineered that their own soldiers, months later, on the Russian front, would whisper a grudging truth. The best machine gun in the squad wasn't German at all. Before long, the WWII, born of a small nation, would shape battles from the Balkans to the endless snows of the East. And in this story, you'll walk alongside the men who carried it, the officers who depended on it, and the armies trying desperately to outfight it. The story of the WWII begins in a place that did not expect to shape the future of a continent-wide war. Czechoslovakia was a young nation, formed after a previous empire collapsed, and its leaders understood that survival depended on strong industry and skilled engineering. Factories in Brno and other industrial centers grew quickly during the interwar years, filling workshops with precise machines and workers who viewed manufacturing as a matter of national pride. Engineers studied the lessons of the Great War, noting how infantry squads often struggled with unreliable automatic weapons, especially when mud, dust, and cold interfered with delicate parts. They believed a new era of warfare would require a light machine gun that any trained soldier could carry, maintain, and fire under harsh conditions. The weapon needed to fire steadily, without overheating too quickly, and it needed to accept ammunition that was already widely available. It also needed to be built from parts that could be machined repeatedly without high failure rates. The result was a compact and surprisingly sturdy light machine gun shaped around a simple gas-operated system. Its internal components slid cleanly, even when the exterior was dirty, and its barrel could be swapped rapidly when sustained fire became necessary. In tests, it produced tight shot groups even when fired from less stable positions. The engineers viewed these characteristics not as special features, but as basic expectations for a modern infantry weapon. As Czech officers evaluated the prototype, they recognized the potential value it could bring to their army. The WWII offered controllable recoil, dependable cycling, and smooth operation during long training sessions. Armorers could disassemble it without specialized tools and clean the parts in minutes. Infantry squads trained with it on fields where dust blew across the surface, or rain turned everything into thick mud, and the gun kept running without repeated stoppages. Soldiers trusted it almost immediately, since it reacted predictably during live-fire exercises and did not surprise the user with sudden mechanical problems. It also accepted the same caliber used in many rifles within the Czech military, allowing ammunition stockpiles to serve multiple roles. By the mid-1930s, Czechoslovakia felt increasing pressure from political instability in Europe. Tensions spread as neighboring countries expanded militarily, and speeches from Berlin suggested ambitions that reached beyond existing borders. Czech leaders attempted to modernize rapidly, ordering more weapons, improving logistics, and strengthening fortifications. The WWII became part of this effort. It represented a belief that precise engineering and reliable hardware could give small nations a chance against larger powers. In training camps, the sound of its controlled bursts echoed across the hills, creating a rhythm that soldiers learned to recognize instantly. Factories continued production, filling crates with newly finished machine guns. Workers kept quality high even as demand increased, since the weapon's reputation depended on consistency. Testing officers repeatedly fired large batches, recording how each gun behaved after long periods of use. The results encouraged them. Even older test units maintained strong performance, and metal fatigue appeared far less frequently than expected. The military began formal distribution across divisions, creating a standardized squad structure built around the WWII as the main automatic weapon. Manuals explained firing positions, barrel changes, and moving formations with it. Commanders believed they had a dependable centerpiece for infantry firepower. However, events outside the factory walls grew darker. Diplomatic agreements failed to stop rising aggression in Europe. Czech officials attempted negotiations, but their country soon faced overwhelming political pressure. The international agreements meant to protect them began to break apart. Factories remained active, yet workers sensed uncertainty in the air. The country found itself standing alone against a growing threat. In early 1939, German troops crossed into Czechoslovakia. The occupation happened quickly, without the large battles that many feared would erupt. German officers and engineers moved through factories, warehouses, and depots, examining every piece of equipment. When they inspected the V-24, they noticed the level of machining and the stable construction. Soldiers handling the weapon during tests remarked on how smooth the action felt and how naturally it rested in firing position. German logisticians recorded its specifications and compared them with existing weapons in their arsenal. The results were surprising. They realized the Czech gun did not require complex machining, yet produced reliability that matched or exceeded many current German designs. The Wehrmacht command gathered reports from officers who had tested seized weapons. The feedback remained steadily positive. Troops valued the gun's ability to handle poor weather, rough transport, and long bursts without malfunction. The design also fit well into squad formations that relied on a mobile source of automatic fire. As German planners prepared for large-scale operations, they recognized that immediate supply would be more important than strict standardization. Using Czech equipment offered a practical advantage. Tens of thousands of ready-to-use weapons were already stored in captured depots. The VZ-24 did not remain a symbol of a small nation for long. Once integrated into German units, it received new markings, new codes, and new logistical pathways. German soldiers carried it during training, learning the steps Czech instructors had originally written. Although it now belonged to an occupying army, the weapon carried its original identity within its metal frame. The machine gun built for the defense of Czechoslovakia began its second life, inside formations, moving toward regions far beyond its birthplace. This moment marked the transition from local development to continental impact. The occupation reshaped the future of the VZ-24, pushing it away from its creators and into new hands that would test it in scattered mountains, harsh winters, and long campaigns still ahead. The weapon's strong foundation would now meet circumstances far more extreme than the designers ever expected, setting the stage for its surprising battlefield reputation in the years to come. When German forces took control of Czechoslovakia, they did so with a clear understanding of what they wanted. Factories, machinery, transport lines, and everything that could strengthen a growing war machine. Yet even experienced officers did not expect to find such large stockpiles of well-kept weapons stored in neat rows inside Czech armories. Long warehouses held crates stacked to the ceiling, each filled with rifles, pistols, spare barrels, and light machine guns that looked almost new. The German units responsible for cataloguing equipment began opening crates one by one, noting serial numbers and condition. As they worked through the inventory, the VZ-24 repeatedly appeared on their lists, with comments describing excellent craftsmanship and reliable testing results recorded by the previous owners. Inspectors visited production plants in Brno and nearby industrial towns. Inside, machines still sat in perfect alignment, as if ready to resume manufacturing at any moment. German engineers walked between workbenches, examining blueprints that remained pinned to walls and chalkboards. They observed how Czech designers prioritized simplicity in construction. It became clear that the VZ-24 did not rely on rare materials or complex forms. Instead, it used strong steel, clean machining, and a straightforward internal system that allowed workers to produce large batches without significant variation. This impressed German officers, who understood how critical consistency was for frontline logistics, especially with the larger conflicts that lay ahead. Wehrmacht technical officers soon gathered groups of infantrymen to test the seized machine guns. These soldiers came from units equipped with early war German automatic weapons that often demanded careful cleaning and frequent replacement of worn parts. They set up on firing ranges near garrison areas and prepared to evaluate their findings. When they loaded belts and took firing positions, many expected the Czech guns to behave like other captured weapons, functional but not ideal for long-term use. Instead, the WWII delivered a steady rhythm of shots that remained smooth, even after repeated bursts. Its barrel warmed slowly and showed little distortion. The gun did not jam easily, even when soldiers added sand and dirt to simulate battlefield conditions. German non-commissioned officers noted how quickly their men learned basic maintenance procedures. The weapon broke down into large, manageable components that fit together with sturdy precision. Cleaning rods and small brushes reached every essential part without difficulty. Armourers timed how long it took for a new user to strip, clean, and reassemble the gun. The results were faster than expected, and significantly faster than similar German models designed before the war started. This discovery hinted at a possible advantage. The WWII could be issued to troops with minimal training and still maintain battlefield efficiency. Once the early tests ended, Wehrmacht staff compiled written evaluations. Each report highlighted the same strengths: reliability, durability, and the ability to handle the type of rough treatment often seen during extended operations. These evaluations reached higher command levels, where officers compared them to the current state of German armament production. The factories inside Germany were already preparing for large campaigns, but shortages of materials and labor strained the manufacturing system. Adding a dependable foreign weapon to the arsenal offered an immediate boost in numbers and reduced pressure on domestic factories. The next step involved integrating captured guns into German supply networks. Ammunition was not an issue, as the Czech weapon used a cartridge compatible with widely available stocks. Manuals were translated quickly, keeping most original instructions while simplifying certain passages for faster training. Spare parts from Czech depots filled storage rooms, ensuring long-term maintenance capacity. German quartermasters created distribution plans that directed thousands of WWII to infantry divisions positioned across the Reich. As trucks transported these weapons outward, officers began noticing a pattern. Units receiving them reported positive results both during drills and during first contact with enemy forces in small early operations. Soldiers often described the gun as steady and trustworthy, even in cold morning air or dusty summer heat. German commanders valued this consistency. They needed weapons that would not falter during long marches or sudden clashes in villages, forests, or open fields. The WWII fit naturally into the squad's rhythm of movement, providing a reliable base of fire without requiring constant supervision from experienced machine gunners. The integration process continued as German strategy shifted toward broader invasions. Planning rooms filled with maps, marked with arrows stretching across countries. The decision to bring captured Czech equipment into these operations allowed German units to expand more aggressively. Field commanders liked that it gave their squads a ready source of automatic fire while conserving more complex German designs for specialized roles. As these voices aligned, the WWII moved from a captured asset to an official tool of the Wehrmacht. Across newly assigned barracks, German soldiers spent afternoons practicing firing positions with the Czech gun. They learned how it behaved when fired from windows, trenches, and shallow depressions. Some used it during nighttime exercises, where moonlight cast hard shadows across the ground. The weapon shone most in uncomfortable situations: uneven footing, sudden wind, or extended firing sessions. Even recruits who lacked combat experience felt predictable feedback each time they pulled the trigger. The steadiness built confidence. Meanwhile, German officers revisited the Czech factories to plan new production schedules. The idea was simple: use these facilities to supply the expanding Eastern campaign. Machines were restarted, workers reorganized, and materials brought in from across the region. Local laborers, many with years of experience, returned to their stations under new oversight. Although the purpose of the work had changed, the precision remained the same. Weapon crates leaving the factories carried both old Czech serial numbers and new German markings, a blend of histories that reflected the strange transition of a small nation's creation into an empire's war arsenal. The rising European conflict soon demanded more weapons, more soldiers, and more units ready for sudden deployment. The WWII now stood as an important link in the chain. What had started as a national defense tool became part of a force preparing for campaigns far larger than its creators ever imagined. With warehouses emptied, factories working again, and German divisions equipped with these reliable machine guns, the story moved toward the next violent step of the war. The Balkans awaited, and the Czech gun would be tested on rugged slopes and narrow mountain roads, where ambushes and unpredictable engagements would challenge every weapon carried by the invading forces. When German forces advanced into the Balkans, they entered a region very different from the Central European landscapes where they had trained. Mountain ranges cut across the horizon, creating steep slopes that forced soldiers to move slowly and cautiously. Small villages sat on ridges where paths twisted between houses made of stone and old wooden beams. The terrain invited ambushes, and resistance fighters knew every hidden trail. German infantry quickly understood that the campaigns here would not be simple marches. They needed weapons that could survive rough travel, constant movement, and sudden fire from unseen positions. The WZ-24 began proving itself almost immediately. German squads often climbed slopes where loose rocks shifted under their boots. Packs, helmets, and ammunition rattled as they moved. Yet the machine gun remained steady in its carrier's hands. Soldiers appreciated that it did not suffer damage when bumped against trees or knocked against rocks. When patrols entered forests filled with dense undergrowth, branches scraped across the weapon without affecting function. Users found comfort in knowing the gun would respond reliably when needed. Encounters with partisans happened at unpredictable moments. Sometimes gunfire erupted from above, as hidden fighters opened fire from high stone terraces. At other times, attackers struck from behind low walls or from inside barns disguised as normal structures. In these situations, German squads relied heavily on the WZ-24 to push back sudden pressure. The weapon's quick burst capability allowed teams to suppress ambushers long enough to reposition. Soldiers could fire short, controlled bursts, even while breathing heavily from the climb. The recoil did not harm accuracy, allowing the squad to adjust quickly to shifting threats. Dust often became a major challenge in the region. Dry winds blew across open fields and through broken streets, lifting particles that coated uniforms and gear. Many firearms struggled in these conditions and required constant cleaning. However, German machine gunners reported that the Czech weapon continued operating even when dust accumulated on the exterior. Its internal parts stayed functional due to the way the gas system managed airflow and debris. Crews wiped the exterior occasionally, but did not need to stop for full cleaning during every march. During one extended push through mountainous terrain, German units advanced toward a network of narrow passes believed to shelter strong partisan groups. Movement required slow progress along high ridges, where rocks and loose gravel often created unstable footing. The light machine gunner and his assistant sometimes had to crawl to maintain balance. Despite these conditions, the WZ-24 fired steadily during multiple skirmishes along the way. Soldiers described how the gun maintained consistent performance even after long hours of climbing, sliding, and taking cover behind jagged stones. They remarked that its construction seemed almost immune to rough treatment. When fighting shifted to villages, the machine gun's compact form became important. Many houses offered limited room to maneuver, and doorways often blocked larger support weapons. The Czech gun fit through tight corridors and window frames, allowing defenders to establish strong firing positions inside buildings. German troops set it on tables, broken carts, or window ledges to provide a stable angle. The bipod adapted well to uneven surfaces, allowing firm placement even on tilted floors or loose rubble. Infantry squads felt more secure, knowing they could bring automatic firepower into confined spaces without difficulty. Partisan tactics relied heavily on speed and knowledge of the terrain. Resistance groups moved quickly, striking German formations with hit-and-run methods. These attacks required rapid German responses, and the WWII helped maintain control. Machine gunners positioned at crossroads or along main paths created zones of fire that slowed enemy movements. This allowed riflemen to flank or secure better cover. The rhythm of the guns' bursts echoed through the valleys, creating a sound that signaled both stability and command. Soldiers learned to recognize these bursts as reassurance that the squad still held ground. Rains also influenced the campaign. Storms swept across the mountains with little warning, turning dry paths into slippery channels of mud. Wet conditions caused misfires in some weapons, especially when moisture mixed with dust to form a thick coating on mechanical parts. Reports from the front noted that the WWII resisted many of these issues. Water slid off the frame due to its clean machining, and internal cycling remained smooth. German gunners appreciated this resilience, as they often lacked time for thorough maintenance after sudden rains. Even when soaked uniforms clung to the body and boots sank into mud, the machine gun continued functioning. During one major encounter, German patrols attempted to secure a ridge overlooking a key supply route. Partisan units attacked in coordinated waves, using the high ground to create strong firing angles. The sounds of rifles and grenades echoed across the slopes. The WWII served as the anchor of German defense. Its operator moved between natural cover points, keeping the weapon fed with ammunition while shifting fields of fire. The barrel warmed, but the gun maintained accuracy through sustained bursts. German officers later described how this stability allowed their units to hold long enough for reinforcements to reach the ridge and force the attackers to withdraw. As the Balkan campaign continued, officers sent regular written reports describing equipment performance. Time after time, they noted the Czech gun as one of the most reliable items in their squads. It handled dust, rain, uneven terrain, and long marches with minimal maintenance. Although they carried equipment from many sources, German, Italian, Austrian, and now Czech, the Balkan experience shaped the weapon's reputation inside the German army. What had been a captured asset now became an essential component of squad tactics. The soldiers who fought in the region understood that their survival often depended on dependable firearms, and the Czech machine gun earned their trust. These lessons carried forward as German high command prepared for a far larger invasion. Soon the army would move toward a new frontier, where cold, snow, and distance stretched far beyond anything encountered in the Balkans. When German forces crossed into the vast lands of the East, they entered an environment that challenged every machine, every soldier, and every weapon they carried. The landscape stretched endlessly, with plains that met the horizon and forests that seemed to repeat forever. When autumn arrived, rains transformed dirt roads into deep mud that trapped wagons and slowed entire divisions. And when winter finally settled in, the land changed into a frozen world where every breath turned to frost and metal stiffened in the bitter cold. Germany expected a fast victory, but the Eastern Front revealed itself as a battlefield where nature fought alongside the Soviet defenders. German infantry units spread across long lines, supporting armored columns and trying to hold captured ground. Squads marched through fields covered with frost, carrying packs that grew heavier with each hour. Machine gunners felt the full weight of the WWII on their shoulders, yet they trusted it after the Balkan experience. Cold winds blew across their faces as they advanced between burnt villages and abandoned farmhouses. Snow dusted their helmets and collected in folds of their uniforms. Every step produced a soft crunch that seemed loud in the quiet winter air. The first signs of trouble came when temperatures dropped sharply at night. Many weapons struggled to cycle properly, especially rifles with tight mechanical tolerances and machine guns that required careful oiling. Gunners tapped bolts repeatedly to free stuck components. In these conditions, the WZ-24 surprised its users. The gun's simple internal layout and robust gas system continued to move even in freezing temperatures. Soldiers noticed that the action stayed smooth as long as they removed excessive oil. Frost collected on the exterior, but the firing mechanism remained functional. This reliability eased tension, as squads knew they could depend on the weapon during early morning attacks when frost caused the most failures. During the first major engagements, Soviet troops launched counterattacks with determination. Infantry formations supported by machine guns and mortars surged across snow-covered fields. Tanks rolled forward with engines growling through the cold, sending waves of snow behind them. German units took cover behind ditches, broken fences, and frozen earthworks. The WWII provided a steady chain of fire that helped stabilize lines under sudden pressure. Gunners used short bursts to conserve ammunition and prevent overheating. Although the cold slowed barrel warming, long engagements still demanded careful control. The gun maintained accuracy even when vibrations from distant explosions shook the ground. As the campaign progressed, mud posed another challenge. When snow melted during brief warm spells, roads vanished beneath thick layers of sticky earth. Soldiers struggled to pull their boots free with each step. Weapons fell repeatedly as troops slipped, and mud coated everything. Some machine guns became unreliable when dirt clogged vents or stuck to moving parts. However, the Czech gun showed strong resistance to fouling. Its internal channels stayed clear enough to function through extended marches. Gunners wiped the outside using cloths or scraps of uniform fabric, but often had little time for more. Even so, the WWII fired, predictably, when Soviet attacks forced immediate readiness. German squads often faced long firefights near rivers, forests, or destroyed settlements. Soviet infantry used cover effectively, and their own machine guns produced a constant roar that echoed through the trees. Winter battles created unique obstacles. Snow muffled sound, making it difficult to detect approaching enemy units. White camouflage made Soviet soldiers nearly invisible until they fired. German troops relied on their machine gun to quickly respond once contact began. The WWII 24 seconds bipod allowed stable placement on snowbanks, tree roots, or frozen planks. Its weight helped absorb recoil even on icy ground, where lighter guns sometimes slipped from position. Night operations brought additional hardships. Temperatures dropped further, and darkness increased the risk of surprise attacks. Soldiers wrapped scarves around their faces, leaving only narrow gaps for their eyes. Breath froze on cloth and formed small crystals that sparkled under moonlight. Machine gunners kept the WWII close to their bodies to reduce exposure to cold. In many cases, they wrapped spare barrels in blankets to prevent rapid temperature shock. When flares illuminated the battlefield, the gunner used the brief light to adjust his aim before returning to firing by sound and memory. Throughout these conditions, the Czech weapon remained steadfast. One encounter highlighted the weapon's importance. A German platoon held a small village near a road crucial for supply movement. Soviet forces launched repeated assaults, using nearby woods to conceal their approach. Snow fell heavily, limiting visibility. Positioned behind a low stone wall, the gunner fired in controlled bursts, forcing the attackers to spread out. The assistant gunner replaced belts, while snow built up around them. Despite the cold, despite continuous firing, the gun did not jam. Frostbite became common, and soldiers wrapped rags around their hands to keep fingers mobile. Campfires offered little warmth. Food froze inside mess tins. But the weapon remained a constant presence beside the men who depended on it. Many wrote in letters or field reports that it was one of the few pieces of equipment that could be trusted fully. Officers noted that the gun adapted well to improvised defenses and mobile formations. Even worn units with limited supplies found the WWII manageable. It did not need rare spare parts, and field repairs were simple. The WWII endured these trials with remarkable success. German soldiers developed a growing respect for a weapon not created by their own industry. As the front stretched further and conditions worsened, the machine gun's reliability became even more valuable. The campaign in the east was far from over, and new challenges loomed. Supply shortages, extended retreats, and heavy losses would soon place unexpected pressure on every squad. The next phase of the war would show how essential the captured Czech gun had truly become. As the war on the Eastern Front dragged forward, the demands placed on German units grew heavier each month. The fast advance that commanders once imagined had turned into a slow struggle filled with constant movement, exhaustion, and shortages. Supply lines stretched across thousands of kilometers, and the harsh climate-damaged equipment faster than factories could replace it. Bombing campaigns struck German industry, reducing production output. Rail lines inside occupied territory suffered from sabotage and overuse. Every squad felt the pressure of limited ammunition, limited food, and limited weapons. In this environment, any piece of equipment that still worked reliably became incredibly valuable. The WWII stood out even more as other weapons began to fail from extended service. German machine guns with tighter tolerances sometimes jammed when parts wore down. Spare barrels became scarce, and broken components could not be replaced quickly. Crews often resorted to using whatever equipment they had available, even if it was old or mismatched. The Czech machine gun, with its simple construction and durable internal system, continued functioning long after many hoped-for replacements stopped arriving. What had once been a captured tool now became one of the most dependable assets in frontline squads. Retreats placed even greater strain on equipment. German formations fell back through forests, fields, and bombed out towns, often moving under Soviet pressure. The WZ-24 stayed slung over the shoulders of soldiers as they crossed rivers or climbed small ridges to find defensive ground. Snow piled around their boots, and wet clothing grew heavy on their bodies. Many guns were dropped, dragged, or banged against debris during rapid movement. Yet when the new defensive line formed and soldiers dug shallow positions, the Czech gun still fired when needed. Its operators learned that the weapon rarely needed more than a quick cleaning before it functioned again. In several retreats, squads had to abandon heavy or damaged equipment to keep moving. Mortars were left behind, and vehicles ran out of fuel. Machine guns that required specialized parts sometimes became useless once their barrels wore out. But the WZ-24 often survived these moments. Crews carried spare barrels wrapped in cloth, and many barrels lasted longer than expected because the gunner fired controlled bursts rather than long streams. The assistant gunner kept ammunition dry inside, whatever containers he could find, bread bags, torn blankets, or old metal tins. Soldiers made do with whatever they had, yet the machine gun remained at the center of their defensive plans. The weapon's importance grew as more units suffered from reduced manpower. Attrition affected every level of the German army. Squads lost experienced machine gunners and replaced them with younger, less trained soldiers. These new recruits struggled to adapt to the demands of cold weather, fighting, and constant movement. The WZ-24 helped them adjust because its operation was straightforward. They could learn basic procedures in a short time, and the gun rarely punished mistakes with mechanical failures. This ease of use allowed squads to maintain firepower even when experience levels dropped. One winter engagement demonstrated the weapon's growing significance. A German battalion held a series of trenches along a frozen river, preparing for a likely Soviet attempt to break through. Supplies were limited, and many guns were worn. When the attack came, Soviet infantry advanced in waves, supported by machine guns and mortars from across the river. The cold air cracked with the sound of continuous fire. German positions shook under impact. The WZ-24 teams provided key moments of stability amid the chaos. Their machine guns fired burst after burst, pushing back attempts to rush the trenches. Even when barrels grew hot enough to melt frost around them, the gun maintained accuracy. Soldiers rotated firing duties to conserve energy, but the weapon itself did not falter. Morale inside the German lines often depended on the sense that some equipment could still be trusted. The WZ-24 became associated with reliability in a war that offered very little predictability. Soldiers spoke quietly among themselves, noting how the gun handled ice, mud, and dust better than many newer models. They carried it with a mixture of pride and relief, knowing it could help hold a position even when conditions were severe. Whenever ammunition arrived at the front, whether in small boxes carried by supply runners or larger batches delivered by trucks, the machine gunners checked it first. They understood how important the next burst could be during surprise attacks. As resources thinned, German industry attempted to produce simplified weapons to replace older models. These emergency designs relied on cheaper materials and faster manufacturing. Many reached frontline units, but they lacked the durability of earlier weapons. Some broke quickly under constant use. Soldiers often chose the Czech gun over these replacements whenever they had the option. The WWII did not need perfect maintenance to continue functioning, and its older barrels often lasted longer than expected. This allowed squads to maintain a steady level of firepower, even when other equipment became unreliable. Communication between units also revealed the gun's reputation. Field reports from platoon leaders, company commanders, and divisional officers frequently mentioned the WWII by name. They described its performance in snowstorms, nighttime defenses, and sudden ambushes. These reports traveled up the chain of command, influencing decisions about weapon distribution. In many cases, planners diverted remaining Czech weapons toward frontline units with the highest casualty rates. Recognizing that these squads needed dependable fire support above anything else, the gun's role expanded not because Germany planned it, but because the deteriorating situation required it. Near the later stages of the Eastern Campaign, the importance of the WWII reached its highest point. Many German divisions were reduced to fragmented groups scattered across the front. Medical supplies ran out, food became scarce, and ammunition dwindled quickly. Yet when small units gathered to defend farmhouses, bridges, or railway stops, the Czech gun formed the backbone of their positions. Even when worn and scratched from years of fighting, the weapon remained one of the few tools capable of supporting a collapsing line. By this stage, the gun had transformed from captured foreign equipment into a symbol of endurance for soldiers trying to survive a war that had turned against them. It could not turn the tide of the conflict, but it gave squads the strength to slow advances, cover retreats, and protect their remaining comrades. The next phase of the story would bring the war to its end, where the fate of these guns and the soldiers who relied on them would reflect the final collapse of the German war effort. As the last years of the war unfolded, the German army faced a situation that grew worse with each passing month. Soviet forces pushed from the east with growing strength, and Western Allied units advanced from the west with overwhelming supply and air power. Cities that once served as major supply hubs fell quickly. Transport lines broke apart under bombing and ground attacks. Every German formation felt the pressure as ammunition, spare parts, and manpower declined. In these conditions, the value of any weapon that still functioned increased sharply, especially those that required minimal maintenance to stay operational. The WWII continued to serve even when most equipment began collapsing from overuse. German squads carried the gun during long withdrawals through forests, muddy roads, and abandoned villages. Snow melted into slush, soaking uniforms and weakening boots. Yet the Czech machine gun survived these hardships with remarkable consistency. Its construction allowed it to resist rust better than many expected. The gas system remained steady despite temperature shifts. Even when soldiers lacked proper cleaning kits, the weapon still fired. This reliability gave units a small sense of stability during a time when predictability was rare. In many final defensive fights, the WWII became the last automatic weapon some squads possessed. Heavy machine guns were abandoned due to lack of transport fuel. Mortars ran out of ammunition. Tanks broke down and could not be repaired. But the Czech light machine gun remained manageable enough for soldiers to carry during forced retreats. Along rivers, in wooded hills, or around ruined farmhouses, its presence helped hold temporary lines. Soldiers placed it behind broken walls or inside small defensive holes dug into frozen ground. The weapon allowed them to delay enemy advances for minutes or sometimes hours, giving nearby units time to regroup or escape. These final battles often happened at night, under sky filled with smoke and distant explosions. Fires burned across towns as artillery shells landed in clusters. German units rarely had enough ammunition to answer every threat. The machine gunners learned to fire only when Soviet infantry approached in concentrated groups. They used short bursts to conserve rounds. The WWII handled this controlled firing well. Its barrel warmed slowly in cold air, and its action remained stable. Soldiers learned to trust the sound of the Czech gun as it echoed through ruined streets. It provided a sense of rhythm that helped organize scattered defenders. As German resistance weakened, Soviet forces gathered captured weapons scattered across fields and buildings. Many soldiers noticed the Czech machine gun among the abandoned equipment. They recognized its sturdy design and noted that it remained intact even after long use. Some Soviet troops kept these guns for temporary use, especially when their own weapons were damaged. The fact that a captured machine gun could remain functional after years of war said much about its design. Some units even collected spare parts and barrels, left behind by retreating German squads, using them to assemble complete, usable weapons. When German forces finally collapsed and surrendered, large stockpiles of WZ-24 remained across Europe. Warehouses, transport depots, and small garrisons held thousands of these guns. Many had mismatched serial numbers from field repairs. Others carried scratches, dents, and markings from years of frontline service. German armourers left handwritten notes in some crates, describing the guns, performance, and maintenance records. The end of the war revealed how widely the weapon had spread across the German army and how deeply it had integrated into infantry tactics despite being created for another nation. The post-war governments that replaced German occupation forces collected weapons from soldiers returning home. Civilians also found machine guns abandoned in barns, basements, or hidden under debris. Military police gathered these weapons for sorting. They separated serviceable guns from those too damaged for future use. Many functioning WZ-24 were sent to arsenals where officers examined them carefully. Some guns were passed to new armies forming in Eastern Europe, where shortages required immediate armament. Other guns were melted down for raw materials to rebuild industries destroyed during the war. A number of surviving weapons entered museums, where historians displayed them as examples of interwar engineering and wartime adaptation. Reports written by German officers described how the gun kept functioning in mud, snow, heat, and extended campaigns. Engineers noted that the weapon's long-term reliability came from its balance between simplicity and precision. Historians observed how a gun built for a small nation ended up supporting one of the largest armies of the conflict. This transformation added a layer of irony to its story, showing how war often reshapes technology in unexpected ways. The WZ-24 also influenced later designs in Europe. Engineers studying its durability identified useful principles for future light machine guns. Some countries adopted elements of its gas system or internal layout. The weapon demonstrated that practical construction could outperform more advanced but fragile designs. Its wartime reputation encouraged nations to consider ease of maintenance as a major factor in weapon production. Even in countries that never used the WZ-24 directly, designers acknowledged the value of its balanced structure. For veterans who carried it, the gun became part of personal memories. Some recalled long marches where the machine gun's weight rested heavily on their backs, yet its reliability offered comfort. Others remembered night defenses where its bursts cut through darkness and pushed back enemy advances. Letters and diaries described how the weapon stayed dependable even when uniforms froze and hands turned numb. For many, the WZ-24 represented one of the few things that did not break down as the war's final months grew increasingly chaotic. As peacetime settled across Europe, the surviving WZ-24 gradually disappeared from active service. Yet the Czech gun's influence remained in training manuals, design studies, and stories passed among soldiers. It served as a reminder that a well-made firearm could shape the outcome of battles far from its birthplace. Its journey from Czech factories to German supply depots and then to battlefields across the continent reflected the unpredictable nature of global conflict. In the end, the WZ-24 became more than a captured weapon. It became a symbol of durability, practicality, and the strange paths that tools of war can travel. The final collapse of the German army left many questions unanswered, but one truth remained clear. The machine gun, created by a small nation, played a role far greater than its designers ever imagined. Its legacy lived on, not through victory or defeat, but through the simple fact that it never stopped working when soldiers needed it most.